The good people of the state of Colorado legislature decided to put Colorado into an interstate compact, forcing us to put our Electoral College votes to wherever New York and LA decides. The better people of Colorado, the citizens, decided to pull that off and put it on a referendum for this fall. It's pretty interesting. Going to the Supreme Court is this issue of Electoral College and those electors, what are known as faithless electors. In other words, they're apparently atheists. Rob Natelson from the Independence Institute, our scholar on constitutional studies. Just bring me up to speed on where we are.
Well, first I want to say it's a privilege to be here in your brand new, beautiful studio.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, really nice.
You're a teetotaler. It doesn't fit in well.
Well, I like beer too. Just want to reassure you on that point. Okay, we've got two cases going up to the U.S. Supreme Court, one out of Washington State, one out of Colorado. They both arose out of the 2016 election, in which several Democratic electors in each state decided that they did not want to vote for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. What happened in Washington State is they voted for Colin Powell instead, and they were fined by the state $1,000 each. What happened here in Colorado was that two of them were finally convinced to vote for Hillary Clinton. One, who tried to vote for Jon Caldara, a Republican governor in Ohio, was actually removed from his position and replaced with someone who will vote for Hillary Clinton. The electors subsequently sued, arguing that under the Constitution, they have the right, if they deem it necessary, to vote for the candidate for whom they want. And that case, both cases are now going before the Supreme Court with oral argument in April.
Help me with this. So every state has the same number of Electoral College votes as their congressional districts plus their two senators.
Right.
So we have 9. And soon it'll be 10. These people who are the electors, how are they chosen? I mean, I know we vote for, in 2016, Hillary versus Trump. We voted for Hillary, and we expected all 9 votes to go to Hillary. One of these folks said, no, I want to do something else. How are they chosen, and why are they free to go off and do something we voted against?
Well, let's back up a bit. Setting up the presidential election system as a whole, which the Electoral College is a part, but it's only a part, was one of the most difficult things the framers had to do. And anyone who tells you that the Electoral College was all about slavery or all about any one thing is simply not telling the truth. They had to balance about 12 different factors. And one of the results of that process was, as you said, each state gets the same number of electors as it has representatives in Congress and in the Senate.
I'm assuming that the intent was to make sure that we didn't have one giant congressional district of the United States, but we actually had states, and states had the power. That this was a way to ensure that states had more control or parity with the federal government.
Not entirely.
Okay.
It was just, again, this is very, very subtle. The Electoral College system, the presidential election system, was set up to give states a significant role, but not to allow states to control the process. There actually were suggestions on the convention floor whereby the states themselves, or the governors of the states, would cast the vote for president. That was rejected. They ultimately decided that the presidential electors would be determined in each state as the state legislature determined. However, they all recognized that eventually the state legislatures would hand that job over to the people of the state. And that is what has happened.
Slow down. I want to make sure I'm following
Yeah.
this. So the framers said, listen, we're going to leave to each state how they decide to choose their electors.
Correct.
Meaning which they assumed the legislature of that state would decide in the same way that the legislature decided their United States senator.
At that time, yeah.
All right. But you said something that confuses me. That they knew, the founders knew that the state legislatures would devolve that power to the people. How did they know that? Is that what they wanted? Was there a guarantee of that?
There was no guarantee, but from the discussion of the founding era, over and over when the Constitution was being promoted, it was emphasized that the state legislatures eventually would devolve this on the people. And that is, in fact, what happened.
How do you know that? As a scholar, how do you know that?
Oh, gee.
Because, I mean, I trust you, but I wouldn't know how in the world
John,
to verify that.
There's a massive amount of material.
Really?
One good source, for example, is a series of volumes which is issued by the Wisconsin Historical Society in cooperation with other scholarly organizations, called The Documentary History of the Ratification of the Constitution. And you can read the newspaper articles and the speeches that were given and so forth.
There's written records of the speeches and what they were saying during the convention,
That's
what
right.
the arguments looked like.
That's right.
Oh, that's got to be fascinating.
It is. It's absolutely fascinating. And so by 1864, every state had turned the job of choosing the presidential electors over to the people.
By 1864.
By 1864.
Okay.
Now, most states had done it well before that. In fact, by 1860, there was only one state left that hadn't. But by 1864, they all...
Curious.
South Carolina.
Really?
Yeah. So, and in fact, one election after 1864, this state, Colorado, the legislature made the determination to choose their own electors. That was in 1876 when the state was admitted to the Union. There wasn't time to organize the election, see. However, so we elect the electors, but over time, the practice has grown up in many states of simply putting the name of the presidential candidate to whom they are pledged on the ballot and not telling us who the presidential electors are.
Was there ever a time where the electors were on the ballot?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So
and they still are in some states.
Really?
Sure.
So I'm not voting for Trump. I'm voting for Bob and Cindy and Gloria, who I know will vote for Trump and not these others.
That's right.
I would have to know where the electors stand on the presidential race.
In general, yeah.
Okay.
Now, what that then happened is, even though it's long been recognized that electors can decide to vote for somebody else, some states, including Colorado and Washington, started passing these laws which said that the electors must vote as the state dictates. Now, I understand the danger here. One, you just identified in the intro, the National Popular Vote Compact. This is where state legislatures are increasingly saying, we're going to assign our electors the way we want to as state legislatures, and we're going to disregard what the people have to say. Another good example, California recently passed a law which said that nobody may appear on the California primary ballot unless that candidate has revealed his or her tax returns, okay? Now, that was struck down properly by the California Supreme Court as unconstitutional.
The California
Supreme Court, a liberal Supreme Court. However, if the electors lose this case, there would be nothing preventing a state legislature, especially a state legislature that's part of the left Vafa that we see in this country right now, from saying, we don't care what our local folks vote for. The electors may not vote for a Republican. They may not vote for somebody who hasn't revealed the tax returns. They must vote for the popular vote winner or whatever. Having the electors
meaning which our legislature, as they did with the national popular vote,
yes,
can run roughshod over the will of the people.
Over the popular vote within that state. That's right. And so ultimately, you see that the presidential elector system is constitutionally one where the electors are responsible to their constituents, the people. They're responsible to the people in the same way that, say, members of Congress are. So if they vote
aren't state legislators exactly the same? Aren't legislators responsive to their constituents, and therefore the state legislature will have to vote for...
Here's the difference. Presidential electors are chosen for a single function at a one-time basis, okay? And they make a pledge to vote a certain way for that one-time basis. With legislatures, you're dealing with people who are subject to a lot of special interest influence. They're there for a long time. They have an inherent bias in favor of re-election. Here's a dramatic story. Over the 2 centuries of America, we've seen state legislatures bought by special interests, many times.
Good thing that doesn't happen anymore.
You're right. It doesn't happen with the Electoral College, see? And so there
Why
are
not?
times, why?
Why can I say, hey, listen, Rob, you're an elector. I'm going to give you a cushy job. You need to vote for Trump.
In fact, historically, it's never happened to any extent. The cost of buying an elector is too high, and the value in buying a single elector is too low. There are
Could be a presidency.
538 electors. That takes a lot of money to buy them all. Or
You don't need to buy all of them. You just need to buy a few in this state,
Yeah,
a
I
few in that
understand,
state.
but I'm telling you, historically, it
Okay,
hasn't
all right.
happened, and legislatures have been bought. So there are instances where presidential electors may justifiably decide, I'm not going to vote for the person I initially pledged I was. For example, a presidential candidate can die. This is becoming an increasing possibility with older presidential candidates and with earlier voting. We have earlier voting than we used to have. And so there's this period of time where a president...
That happened. I'm trying to remember in Wisconsin. I was trying to remember who opened up the voting, because we now don't have a voting day. We have a voting month. People are putting in their ballots, and he dies.
Right. Or even here in Colorado, people vote early through the mail.
Right.
And so you've got an increasing window of time where a presidential candidate can die or become disabled. You've also got increased possibility of adverse information coming out regarding the candidates. You also have a possibility, and it's not likely, but it can happen, where the Electoral College is won by somebody who really only collected 30% of the popular vote or 35% of the popular vote, and the vast majority of the people can't stand him. That's a circumstance where presidential electors may decide, do we really want to come up with a compromise
You
candidate?
did a wonderful paper explaining that in other countries.
Yes, that's what happens in popular vote countries,
Right.
where people with 30% of the vote get elected.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so this is still so confusing to me. Let's talk about Colorado.
Yeah.
How are the individuals who make up our electoral voters chosen here?
They're generally chosen by the presidential candidate.
Really?
Yeah. And that's a bit of a problem, because the idea behind an electoral college is that the electors really are supposed to be outstanding figures who we
So
trust.
are they chosen at the state assemblies for the Republican and Democratic Party, saying, hey, if Trump wins, will our electors be? I want to be it.
I'm not sure about Colorado. When I were in Montana, where I was for many years, that's right. The state convention chose the electors, so it can vary from every state. But what we have seen, as I mentioned, is that the electors tend to be party operatives rather than outstanding figures. Ideally, our Colorado electors should be people like former Governor Hickenlooper, former Governor Owens. People who were prominent, people who pledged to vote for their tickets, but who we also trust to make good decisions if
Because
a
we know where
disaster
they stand.
strikes. Yeah.
So we know, let's say it was Bill Owens on this side and Hickenlooper on this side, and people like them. So we had Bill, we had Hank Brown, and other trusted mainstream Republicans, and we had Ritter and Hickenlooper and Mayor Hancock, et cetera.
That's how a system's supposed to work.
So you know who they're going to vote for, but we don't have that. I don't know who I couldn't name a single elector.
Yeah, and that is partly because of the state laws that simply are designed to turn them into automatons. Okay,
Right.
They're not supposed to be automatons. Otherwise, the founders would have simply assigned a certain number of votes to each state, which was something that was considered.
You've written
but
an
rejected.
amicus brief to the Supreme Court on this issue.
Yeah.
You have had incredible fortune in your, is it amici briefs? Am I saying that right, or just amicus briefs?
Amicus briefs.
All right. Whatever underwear you're wearing, it really works well. How many times has your work been cited in Supreme Court decisions?
Well, what's been cited in Supreme Court decisions are my research papers,
Right.
which we cite in amicus briefs.
Okay.
And so the answer is 19 times in 6 different cases.
Wow.
And by the way, that's all been since I came back to the Independence Institute full time, because the Independence Institute has promoted my work, my scholarship, in a way, for example, that didn't happen when I was in academia.
That's just funny that scholarship gets more promoted here at Independence Institute
Believe it, my friend.
than in a public university.
Believe it, my friend. When people make contributions, if they want to make contributions to good scholarship, they need to give the money to the groups like the Independence Institute, not to the universities that have been largely corrupted. And by the way, you didn't pay me to say that, but it's absolutely true.
I don't pay you much anyway. It doesn't matter.
It's infinitesimal.
All right, so let me go to this amicus brief and the research you've done. You're telling the Supreme Court, hey, Supreme Court, you should rule in favor of the faithless elector.
No, you should vote in favor of the Constitution as it actually was intended to operate and as it in fact means. So if you read the Constitution, you read that portion dealing with electors, the word elector inherently meant somebody who could make a free choice. The word ballot, they vote by ballot, inherently meant secret ballot. To vote inherently meant to make a choice. And to back up the inherent meaning of those terms, we have a great deal of history behind those terms that explains how the system was supposed to work. So you're not going to vote for a, quote, faithless elector, who may not be actually faithless. That's kind of a biased term anyway. You're going to be voting for the true meaning of the Constitution, and you're going to be voting for the rule of law. Even if I were personally opposed to the founders' scheme, I would say the U.S. Supreme Court needs to carry out the Constitution as it was drafted, and if we need to make a change, then we can make a constitutional amendment.
All right, so a lot of conservatives hear what you just said, and they go, "Oh, Rob, you're working for the other team. You're working for the other team. The other team wanted to stop Trump from being president. That's why they tried to do something other than voting for Hillary. They wanted to pull people off, say, hey, we won't vote for Hillary. If you don't vote for Trump, let's work out a deal. Let's find a way, we electors, to make a deal. Therefore, you're working for the wrong team."
Well, in the first place, notice that they didn't actually succeed in blocking Donald Trump. And that's because the structure of the Electoral College was set up precisely to avoid that kind of stampeding. Secondly, key to the Constitution and the rule of law is we don't manipulate the document because we don't like a particular outcome. We don't say, oh, gee, Polly Baca wanted to vote for John Kasich just to stop Trump, and therefore we should change the Constitution. I mean, that's everything that conservatives, libertarians, and frankly all Americans should be against. Part of the basis for liberty is a rule of law, and part of the rule of law is respecting our supreme law.
You can understand that voters in Colorado, let's for the sake of argument, it all comes down to our electors, all right, and whether it's George Washington or Hitler, all right, and we all there it is. It comes down to our guys. We want George Washington, but it all comes down to this one Nazi who we elected, and he goes, no, we're going to do this way, even though we voted the other way. The expressed viewpoint of the citizens of Colorado through their presidential ballot was to elect George Washington. This guy goes, nah,
John,
I want him.
Let's put this in perspective, okay? This is a fail-safe mechanism, this idea of elector discretion. We have had a number of so-called faithless electors all through our history. It has never influenced, it has never changed the result of a presidential election, not once, okay? In every election.
Give me a history of some of these faithless electors. And by the way, we're using a pejorative term, faithless elector.
It is a pejorative term. It's probably an unfair term. In 1972, one Nixon elector in Texas voted for the Libertarian candidate instead.
If I remember, Reagan's re-election was such a wipeout that somebody decided to vote for Mondale because otherwise Reagan would have won a higher percentage than Washington won, and he didn't think that was that.
I mean,
am I remembering that correctly?
That's a silly reason, John.
Right.
And then were a handful of people.
What, like voting for the Libertarian was?
There were a
handful
of people.
Reason?
There was handful of people in Colorado, Washington, and Texas who did not vote for the candidate to whom they were pledged. But it has never changed the result of an election
is there
in
a large,
228 years
Is
of
there a
history.
large history of electors going?
Yes, it's always been recognized that some electors may decide to vote for other candidates. But as the only way it could really change the result of a presidential elector as a practical matter is in the nightmare scenarios that I've mentioned, where, you know, a Salvador Allende, a communist candidate, winds up winning what appears to be the presidency with 30% of the vote. Or
You're talking about Bernie?
I'm not talking about Bernie specifically. I was talking about Salvador Allende specifically. You know, Adolf Hitler was chosen Chancellor of Germany with 33% of the vote. Or the situation where a candidate dies or becomes disabled or hugely damaging information comes out. The other advantage of protecting the constitutional scheme is to prevent these games played by, as I call it, the Luftwaffe, the state legislatures who decide, well, you know, we're going to stack the deck by saying that this guy can't be on the ballot and that guy can't be on the ballot, and we're going to control how the electors vote.
But you can understand my confusion. Well, I'm trying to work through this in my own head.
Sure.
California says, you know, you have to show us your tax returns. No, let the people decide if
Sure.
they feel that that's a requirement. If you don't show it, I won't vote for you. So in the same way, the people say, no, I want to vote for Bernie or Hitler or whomever, and the elector goes, no, I'm sorry, you voted for that, I'm going this way. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is the checks and balances in the system. I mean, we do not have, for example, a direct national popular vote because the founders recognized that sometimes it's actually necessary to choose somebody who did not win the overall popular vote. We have a system whereby electors can exercise discretion because the founders recognized that sometimes it may be necessary for an elector to vote for somebody that is still popular, but maybe not what the people specifically want.
Did the founders ever talk about and consider the popular vote, as we keep calling it, that we'll just have one big election instead of all these little state elections?
Yes. Yeah, it was debated at the Constitutional Convention. The issue was raised by James Wilson, and James Wilson talked about the possibility of direct election by the people. It was viewed as impractical, and also there were other problems with it, like the possibility of stampeding.
What do you mean stampeding? What do you mean stampeding?
Stampeding is when a very, very kind of an outside candidate or a very popular guy gets elected without due consideration. I mean, a good example happened in Minnesota a few years ago when they elected a professional wrestler, Jesse Ventura, in a fractured field with 37% of the vote. The Electoral College is partly designed to prevent that to happen, and it generally has prevented.
Because you need a majority
of the Electoral College.
Of the Electoral College.
That's right. You can win with a plurality of the vote, or even less than a plurality of the popular vote, but you still need a majority of the Electoral College. So even James Wilson ultimately backed down and said, indirect election is good enough for me. And his proposal was indirect election, which is something like what we got eventually.
For people, really basically, for people who now get to act as the legislature and say, should we join this compact?
Yeah.
Where we pledge our 9, soon to be 10 electoral votes to whatever the mass wants of the country. Most people go, well, yeah. I mean, this is a presidential election. You know, this way my vote counts, your vote counts. We all put it in the same pool. Explain to me why that's not a good thing.
Well, first, it's not a good thing because it's unconstitutional. I mean, suppose the state legislature made a decision, we're going to pledge our electors to whoever gives us the most money. We can use the cash, and so whichever candidate comes to the most money.
And we can use that to fix our road.
Yeah, obviously that's completely contrary to the constitutional design. The U.S. Supreme Court wouldn't uphold it, and for a similar reason, the U.S. Supreme Court wouldn't.
What if the people pass this fall? Then does that give it more legs?
No, because the function of a presidential elector is not to represent the state, and it's not to represent the legislature. The function of the presidential elector is to represent that electorate that voted for that elector. You know, it's not the function of a presidential elector to represent whoever carried New York or California. Yeah.
Are you convinced that if this national popular vote compact gets enough states that when it goes to court, and it won't go to court until and if that happens, right? Because it's moot. But when that happens, how confident are you that the courts would go?
I'd lay 3-to-1 odds.
3-to-1.
Yeah, 3-to-1 odds. Yeah. The other, and it's also a bad idea on policy grounds, and we know because we look at those countries that have direct popular vote, whereby you can simply be elected with a bare plurality. And those countries are Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, Paraguay, the Philippines.
Hitler's
Germany. Basically third world countries, and you get situations where candidates are routinely elected with far smaller percentages than Donald Trump got.
But aren't there a lot of Western countries, first world countries, that still have a popular vote?
They have popular vote, but they have runoff. The national popular vote system does not provide for any runoff elections.
So in other words, with a runoff election, you are guaranteed that the guy in charge, much like the mayor in Denver, it has the support of at least half the voters.
Or, at least a second choice of at least half the voters, that's right. But that's not what the national popular vote people want to do. They want us to replicate the Mexican system, where, for example, in 2006, a candidate winning 36% of the vote became president of Mexico. Or in the Philippines, where in a fractured field in 1992, Fidel Ramos was elected with 23% of the vote. I mean, that's the kind of road we would be going through. And of course, it gives outside power to whatever candidate can gin up a bare plurality in urban states or urban areas like New York and Los Angeles.
That's a scary thought.
It is very scary. It's very scary. Now, the national popular vote people will come back to you and they'll say, well, in those large metropolitan areas, they only control about 15% of the popular vote. Well, yeah, you got 15% of the popular vote. You're well on your way to a 30% plurality. That's number one. But number two, that you can manipulate elections and create fraud in urban areas better than you can, let's say, on the western slope of Colorado or in Montana, right? And so that gives the candidate incentives to try to create a situation, like Mayor Daley used to do in Chicago, is just got to manufacture votes.
When I hear that, so let me see if I'm following you, that we now have a tight national vote, and Colorado might have great ballot integrity, and so there's not much there. But another state might have somebody who's Secretary of State has just got a mimeograph machine and is pumping out these things. According to them, each state gets to decide how to verify their ballots. So if there's one state that wants to go rogue and just go crazy with ballots, there's really no check and balance, is there? Can't you go to the courts?
That is really perceptive, John, because what the National Popular Vote Compact says is that each state has to accept each other state verification of the results, even if at a particular state those results are known to be defective. So, as you say, Colorado may have perfect integrity, but if the result of the so-called national popular vote, as certified by states like Florida,
right.
Then our Secretary of State must yield to their certifications. And furthermore, even if you see trouble coming in advance of the election, you can't withdraw, because the National Popular Vote Compact says no state can withdraw, I think, 6 months before the end of the presidential term. So if in September Colorado officials say, good grief, there's a lot of fraud going down, we can see it coming in New York and Florida,
or
we're
Texas,
stuck. or Texas, we're stuck. We have to give our electoral votes to whoever is certified correctly or wrongly as the national popular
without
vote.
any sort of place to run to in time to
That's right.
to overturn it.
No way to run away.
All right, I just heard two very scary things. So let me see if I'm following you. The first one that really shook me was the thought that there's no runoff, so that in other nations with a popular vote, there's a runoff system.
In other advanced nations.
Other
yes.
advanced
Yeah.
first world nations,
Yeah.
our Western friends, and so therefore, it's Hitler plus everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Hitler gets 30%, but nobody can beat him in a polarity. There's still a check and balance. So if Hitler had to go to a runoff election,
He would be beaten.
he would have been beaten. We don't have that. And what bothers me about politics is our rearview mirror and our foresight is really, really narrow. We're pissed off that Trump won, and therefore we want somebody who only wins the popular vote, so we'll do this.
Yeah.
When in fact we're putting our country on a road for however long our nation lasts, which hopefully will be a long, long time. But we're setting it on a road, for whenever a Hitler pops up. So the no runoff scares me, and then you must accept what some other state's Secretary of State decides is the vote count. So, and again, I have no reason that our 50 Secretaries of State plus the 7 other territories or whatever, that they're fine, but it only takes one to challenge that in all the future.
John,
am I wrong to be terrified by this?
You're right to be terrified. Let me.
And am I reading
Not to
it
be
right?
a Pollyanna, but let's give you another reason to be terrified, and that's the threat of regionalism. That is one reason the Electoral College was established, and one reason the founders said you must win a majority of the Electoral College, and if you don't win a majority of the Electoral College, you must win a majority of the states in the House of Representatives, is to ensure that a candidate could not be elected by simply piling up votes in a given region when all the other regions hated him, right? And so as a result of this, our elections generally result in the election of a candidate with wide national support. And in the very few cases where the popular vote loser has won the Electoral College, it's because the popular vote winner has been a regional type candidate. Now, if you look at maps, for example...
Hillary being a good example, that she was very popular in urban areas,
Exactly.
but didn't even go visit, really.
That's
the
right.
Rust Belt states that...
That's why Hillary lost. Hillary lost because she was too much of a regional candidate. Her support was
On the coasts.
on the coasts and a few metro areas in the middle. That was it. The Electoral College is designed to prevent that from happening. There's only one. If you look at the last not the last Mexican election, but 2 of the last 3 Mexican elections, you can see that the winner won by being elected in one region. Totally shut out in other regions, but essentially won in one concentrated region. That's a very dangerous situation. The one instance in which the Electoral College has, quote, failed us and allowed the election of a regional candidate was 1860. And that was the choice of Abraham Lincoln. And thank goodness it was Abraham Lincoln, right? But it was the election of a regional candidate, had virtually no support out of the Northeast and a few enclaves in the West, and the result was civil war. So that's what the Electoral College is designed to protect us against.
You said something that's new information to me, so let me see if I got this.
Sure.
If the Electoral College stalls out and they're meeting and they cannot come to a majority, what happens? Do they just keep going and going and going and going and going?
This is an important point, John, because we don't just have an Electoral College, we have a 3-tier presidential system. First, the people vote for their electors. Secondly, the Electoral College votes. And third, if a majority of the Electoral College doesn't elect on the first ballot, there's only one ballot, then we have a runoff. And that runoff is in the House of Representatives. Win...
Stop there.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm following this. So you're telling me there is no second ballot in the Electoral College?
One ballot.
So we one shot, we send our guys out there, they lay down their one ballot, and there's not a majority for a candidate. That is, there's not 50 plus 1.
270 votes.
Right. So there's 269 votes. Well, thank you guys. Head on home. The House of Representatives just chooses the president.
That's right. See, the Electoral College is like a convention. It's a body chosen for one specific purpose, and then it goes home. So one ballot for president, one ballot for vice president, you're done. Then it goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives votes by state delegation, and you have to get 26 votes to win. Now, this has only happened... Yeah, let me just finish it.
Yeah.
This has only happened twice in American history, and the reason it's only happened twice in American history is that every viable presidential candidate knows he's got to be a national candidate and win a majority of the Electoral College to win, and it's not enough to be a regional candidate.
All right, so again, you're telling me two things I want to clear up. God, I'm glad you weren't my professor in college. It goes to the House, but you said the House has to vote by state. Mm-hmm. So it's not that here in Colorado where we have a split of, 5-2, 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And so these 5 vote for this guy, these 2 vote for that guy. It doesn't happen that way. They all have to, and how do they decide? By a vote amongst themselves?
They caucus among themselves, that's right.
What if they have an even number?
If an even number, they're not going to vote. And their vote is not going to be counted. And it's not going to count toward the 26, the clear majority that the winner has to have.
So again, for the House to choose our president, because the Electoral College didn't get a majority, 26 states, not territories.
Absolute majority.
Has 26 states. So if that has to be 26 states where there is a clear majority of the House members, congressmen, who go, this is our guy, that's our guy.
It's a clear majority of the states.
What were the 2 times that the Electoral College didn't elect someone on the first ballot?
The first time was in 1800, and that was before we had the 12th Amendment, which reformed the system. That was the election where Jefferson won the election. His running mate was Aaron Burr. At that time, the electors couldn't sort out who they wanted for president and vice president. So the electors in Jefferson's party all voted for Jefferson and Burr. And Burr then said, hey, I got as many votes as Jefferson did. Maybe I should be the president. And that was resolved in favor of Jefferson by the House of Representatives, as it should have been. The other was in 1824, when you had 4 major candidates for president, and nobody got a majority of the Electoral College. The number 1 guy and the number 3 guy, the number 2 guy and the number 3 guy formed an alliance. John Adams and John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, and the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams as the president.
You also said that the House then votes by state for president. The Electoral College votes for president and then vice president. Mm-hmm. If they can't do it, it goes to the House. Could it possibly happen that they vote for president, don't get a majority, vote for vice president, and do?
Yes.
At which point, is that the vice president, no matter who the...
That's right. That person...
So you could have a president and vice president who are completely at each other's throats.
It's theoretically possible, and it did happen in an early election where you had president and vice president from different parties. It's not very likely. Let me just point out also another wrinkle in the system is that the election for vice president, if nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College for vice president, that doesn't go to the House. That goes to the Senate. So you need a majority of the Senate to elect the vice president. This is a complicated...
Again, by state?
No, the senators are going to vote as individuals. Oh, wow. Yeah. So this is a complicated system, and it's a little bewildering when you first get into it. But what I want to take away from what I want you to take away from this is how finely balanced and well thought out this system is. And that is, in fact, one reason it has worked so well over the years.
What I heard is we do the national popular vote. We're making it easier for some time in our nation's history to elect a Hitler with a...
I think that's not the only argument against it. I think electing a dictator is remote, but it has happened. And I'll cite you 3 examples. Number 1, the parliamentary election of 1933 in Germany, which resulted in Hitler becoming chancellor with 33% of the vote. Secondly, the election, at that time they had a straight popular vote system with slight modification. The election of Salvador Allende, a communist, in Chile in 1970, and much more recently, the election of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua in by 38% of the vote. And since he was elected with 38% of the vote, Nicaragua's never had an honest election.
Incredible. All right, you want to learn it all? Here it is. The original Constitution. I like the second Constitution, what they call Constitution Light or New and Improved. You did this a long time ago, not a long time ago, but this thing still has a lot of weight. What do you learn in this book? I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to talk to you.
It's a book that's written in layman's terms. It simply explains what the Constitution actually meant right after the adoption of the Bill of Rights.
Robert, thank you so much. I always learn way too much every time I talk to you.
Thank you, John. It's fun as usual.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.